My name is Lea Kannar-Lichtenberger, and I'm presenting to you an artist's perspective on climate change. What a vast subject I've chosen. Climate change. I cannot speak to you about all areas that encompass climate change, but I will show you the way that science surrounding it has influenced my art. This talk will show how one artist's approach, namely mine, can initiate discussion and generate engagement from the public about climate change. This talk will look at my research and resulting artworks created from these on-site investigations from the Galapagos Islands to Australia and Lord Howe Island, and then south to Deception Island, Antarctica. And it is through these artworks I will discuss how climate change has and is affecting our world. To begin with, there are two fundamental notions central to my understanding of what is happening in the world. One in particular is the Anthropocene. Now, this word has long been accepted as describing the geological age in which we are living, loosely defined as the age of human impact. That is a driving force of significant change on Earth. The second is climate change. This is not a new phenomenon, and scientists have been warning everybody about what is happening since the 1950s. Then it was referred to as the greenhouse effect. No matter what you call it or how you dress it up, what science does know, without doubt, is that humans are impacting, through increased CO2 emissions, the way in which the planet and climate systems operate. Artist Pinar Yoldos says, "We have complicated our relationship with life. The boundaries between nature and culture sublimated, and we are breathing a gaseous mixture of man-made with natural. Our very culture overrides nature. Our capitalist biomass manufactures mountains of e-waste, beaches of tar, rivers of zinc and oceans of plastic. We are an army of plastic surgeons giving the planet a new face." However, this dialogue approaches the environmental issues from the view of outside, separate from everything else. This illusion of separation between nature and culture has humans isolated, whereas we are part of the whole and therefore wholly connected to all life. In the age of the Anthropocene, this talk will explore how humans impact our world both by their presence and indirectly by their lifestyle. I have not just jumped on the climate change bandwagon. I have been interested in Australia, the landscape, and how humans have impacted on it for decades. As a society, many people have a simplistic idea of what is nature. Oh, it's over there, that tree or the bush, an animal, a bird or aquatic life we don't usually see. From the trees that evoke a sense of power of past ages, or the cliff top that creates an understanding of the sublime, or really from which we view the world and creates an imbalance perspective of our power over the land. And it is this abuse of power where humans feel it is their right to terraform any landscape that does not meet our needs or pillage for profit, is where one could argue it all begins. What do we lose when we transform bush to agriculture or housing, for that matter? What do we gain? Well, one significant gain is for the developers. Whilst the government and people in general continue to underrate the real value of natural landscapes and see them as vast, when in actual fact they are but tiny, tiny spaces of refuge for wildlife, there will be no end to the clearing of the natural world for profit. We are not alone on the planet, and our lives require a more holistic view of our interaction with nature. By engaging the viewer on a personal level, by wanting people to truly consider the way we as humans are terraforming our land, I wanted questions to be raised and to create artworks which can transform someone's awareness or lifestyle. So what happens locally when the land is cleared, you ask? How would that create an impact on the climate? Well, without a canopy of trees, the land is exposed. Instead of trees expiring oxygen and moisture into the air, which help to keep temperatures down, the ground loses nutrients and creates a heat sink. In 2017, over 15.8 million hectares of tree cover was lost in the tropics. That is equivalent to the size of Bangladesh, or 40 football fields of trees every minute for just 1 year. When you consider the loss of bushland in Australia has now surpassed the deforestation of Brazil, can Australia continue to hold on to the quarter-acre block idea? Industrially, we view each tree as a commodity, regrowable. Yet we need to consider that for every 100-year-old tree cut down now, any replanting will take 100 years for the new tree to reach the same climate influence of the one we just killed. Forests regulate climate. Trees shade the ground. They transpire water into the atmosphere. Now, a mature tree can transpire around 100 litres of water each day, which equates to the cooling from running 2 air conditioners. In 2019-2020, the fire season started early, with drought affecting 95% of the New South Wales, with persistent dry and warm conditions across the state. 12 local government areas began the bushfire season 2 months early, on the 1st of August, with another 9 local government areas following on the 17th of August in 2019. More than 12.6 million hectares burned across Australia. An average fire season here in New South Wales typically is around 300,000 hectares. 434 million tonnes of CO2 was emitted. This equated to over 3/4 of the 532 million tonnes that Australian industry emitted in 2018-2019. 11.3 million, or 57% of the Australian adult population, were physically affected by smoke from the bushfires in New South Wales, and over 1 billion animals were killed. And this figure only included different types of mammals, birds and reptiles. However, across Australia, the number is estimated to be over 3 billion creatures that died in our bushfires. Then, if you expand that and include invertebrates, as many as 240 billion have been incinerated by the fires in just New South Wales and Victoria alone. Not only do you have deforestation increasing the release of carbon dioxide into the air, but you have another devastating effect of increasing heat: lightning strikes. This summer, 2019-2020, illustrates how climate change is increasing the likelihood of compound events, where extreme weather events occur simultaneously or follow each other in close succession, resulting in greater impacts. Despite concerted efforts to reduce tropical logging, clearing forests for agriculture and other uses continues to drive large-scale deforestation. Over the past 17 years, tree cover loss has been rising steadily in the tropics. Yet science tells us that the more trees we have, the more moisture in the air, and therefore more rain and consequently fewer fires. This drawing Memories to Rue, examines one of the many symptoms of how humans are impacting on the environment. Last summer, the east coast of Australia experienced one such manifestation of the catastrophic bushfires. As the ash lay upon the ground, no life, sound or colour inhabits this post-apocalyptic world. And memories of the loss of non-human life remain shrouded. This recent epic natural disaster, along with increasing tropical storms fueled by climate change, will only become more frequent and severe. Some would argue that we would not have the fires if we cleared the land. Yet this is a very colonialist view of how humans have engaged with the landscape for centuries. And in Australia, the science of the impact of land clearing is evident. The 2020 Climate Council of Australia's Summer Crisis Report states that the simplistic argument about arson, hazard reduction and green tape do not stand up to scrutiny and are not responsible for what is clearly a series of weather-driven disasters. Worsening extreme weather is clearly driven by a warming climate. The 6 hottest years on record are in the past 6 years. Out of the past 20 years, which are the first 20 of the 21st century, 19 of them are in the top 20 hottest years on record. However, 1998 remains in the top 10 of the top 20 hottest years, sort of acting like a canary in the mine shaft. Was it a precursor to current temperatures like the summer of 2019? You would think so. Which 2019 records show was over 2 degrees above the global average. So how can we get a mental grip on the temperature changes that have been happening globally? This heat map put together by the Climate Council of Australia shows us 140 years of monthly average temperatures all put together. The months in a line across the page and the years downwards. So you can compare each month through the 20th century since 1880. So for example, the temperature for each individual June can be compared to the average of all Junes, each July compared to all Julys, and so on. What this shows makes the question of climate temperature increases so clear that there is really no room for denial. Australia's Paris Agreement commitment states that it will reduce emissions to 28% below the 2005 levels by 2030. How much harder is that going to be if, as a country, our government still continues to reject the science of climate change and our role as a significant mining country, with this industry feeding the global desire for coal and petroleum products? With the oil industry, it is not only producing the fuel to run our cars, but also the base product to create the 57,000 different types of plastic that now float around our planet. Plastics. The importance of this problem, along with rising sea temperatures affecting our oceans, are just one part of my art practice. Towards Dystopia is an installation that works on engaging the viewer with visions of the islands we hold dear to the imagination, a kind of utopian destination. A water installation that works to connect both the plague of desalination plants that are increasing globally as fresh waters become scarce, but specifically from the Galapagos Islands to Lord Howe Island. The flow of water in the South Pacific is signified by the movement of salted water through transparent piping. From the Galapagos to Lord Howe, a circulation mimicking the ocean's connection to our world. Echoing coral formations within the Petri dish, water flows onto a fish tank filled with the ocean debris collected from Lord Howe, a vanitas of utopia. The fish tank which is a slice of the ocean. The movement of the warmed water flows through it, filled with our plastic waste. Water continues its movement through the piping to the tea urn and back to the dish. This tea urn that represents our place within the collective community, the mediocrity, the repetition, but that by its repeated action destroys, moving into the banality of our lives as this tea urn warms the water. And the water becomes rank not only with bacteria but the smells of heated plastic permeating the room. It speaks to one possible future, an inescapable plastic presence with the putrefaction of the surrounding world. An installation that not only has the reason for travelling to these wonderful places projected across its surface, but also confronts you with the physical effect our presence has both on site and remotely. In the past 5 years, the Great Barrier Reef has experienced 3 major coral bleaching events, with the most recent, 2020, being the most severe and widespread than previous events in 2016 and 2017. And with each bleaching event, the nurseries of our oceans are increasingly under threat. Coral reefs, so crucial to our ecology and an area that is increasingly vulnerable from the effect of climate change from sea temperature. However, it is not just the warming waters threatening our reef systems. This combination of all the drivers, from the origin of the emissions in the mining and shipping of coal through the reef to the outcome of this mining, the increase in CO2 levels, creating an escalation of global temperatures that makes our oceans warmer and acidifies the water. To create a discourse and to reflect on the problems facing our most fragile of ecosystems, I used Favia speciosa. Okay, so it's not a spell from Harry Potter, but it's a coral. And this is a native to Lord Howe Island off the New South Wales east coast, to inform the shape of my ceramics for several installations. Favia speciosa, in its ceramic form, sits as part of my installation, submerged in water in a petri dish. This dish, 120 centimetres in diameter, creates a comment on the roles that science has in not only creating the plastics that have been embraced by the multinational production and consumer industries. The dish also sits as an icon reflecting science's role to solve the problems created by this and climate change, working tirelessly to save the reefs of our world that are so pivotal to all our lives. Septum Oceanus Despoiled is an installation that explores the questions surrounding microplastics in the environment. These ceramics, on a large scale, represent the coral, Favia speciosa. Placed in the sands on Tamarama Beach to begin a discussion of one of contemporary society's most pressing problems, microplastics, the consumerist impact on our biosphere and thus impacting via the food chain on all populations of our world. Embedded within the surface of these works is text. The litany of debris collected from one walk on 3 beaches of Lord Howe Island. Listed here in various sizes, from that which is visible to the microscopic. Septum Oceanus Despoiled, or 7 oceans ruined. There are 7 ceramics which not only signify the number of continents, 7, and the number of seas on our world, 7, but also the significance of the number itself. 7 is seen as the number between life and death, the seeker, the thinker that takes nothing at face value. These 7 ceramics sit as a declaration that there should be no compromise in the human responsibility to caring for all species and lands of this planet. Our connection to all living things is so broad, yet can be reduced to a cellular level. Colliding Worlds is a series of engraved Petri dishes depicting visions of microscopic cellular examinations, text, human DNA coding, and prose to construct a bridge between science and the spirit, embracing life and death, science, and the history of discovery. Using a black circular background to allow space and emptiness to surround the work, as though you're viewing it through an oversized microscope. You see the minutiae of existence catalogued below. Science and technology continue their creative watershed moments of discovery. With little pause to ask the questions of consequences, Colliding Worlds acts as a reminder of these questions. The intentional misquote included attributed to Charles Darwin. Megison wrote in 1963 that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And it's buried within this work and is designed to manipulate the viewer. These words of influence are full of truths that will surround the planet's future. Alongside this misquote sits a cellular manifestation of these changes. Water. Our most precious commodity is wasted in our race for the commodification of all things. All life, including our own cellular uniqueness, is being catalogued, not just archived, but scientifically interrogated to be used as building blocks for future research and cellular manipulation. In Connections of Life, I ask the viewer to reflect on water and its relationship to this biota, the curling shape of the dead dandelion tree, sectioned and stained, in its memory of time, wraps around one water droplet, yet remains out of reach of another. This time the perfect sphere of water, representing the planet, connecting to the stuff of life. However, you know by the photograph that it is already dead and water will not help its survival now. But what of others beyond our vision? This memory, coloured like our deep, vast oceans connecting our water-rich world, invites you to bear witness. But it is not all bathed in precious commodity, as our governments squabble and manipulate the flow of rivers across our landscape, and our communities struggle with droughts. With New South Wales, South Australia and the Murray-Darling Basin having their driest year on record, 2019 shaped up as a significant milestone for Australia, as nationally rainfall was 40% below average. This also is the lowest on record. The global headline-making mass fish die-offs of past years may be only just the beginning. By the end of February, when the Climate Council of Australia put out its 2020 report, most of New South Wales remained drought affected. However, most of the Greater Sydney was no longer drought declared. The summer bushfires were followed by torrential rainfall, damaging gales, hailstorms and flooding in many areas, including northern New South Wales, Sydney and the Illawarra. Unfortunately, this early rain did not penetrate inland very far, leaving most of New South Wales still in drought, with Broken Hill having received just 8 millimetres of rain in the first few months. We simply cannot leave this mess for our children to fix. At Cape Grim, the furthest northwest tip of Tasmania, CSIRO has been collecting atmospheric samples since the 1970s. With this collection, scientists have been tracking climate changes. We can see that in the past 60 years, levels of nitrous oxide and methane have been increasing. The January samples for 2020 put the atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide at 408 parts per million, all of which underline the unprecedented rate of increase of these climate change influences. In dissipation, a pantaptich, or a 5-panelled installation of the glacier on Livingston Island in Antarctica. This examines the squandering of our planet's resources as it continues to gather speed. Dissipation is a work that is a reminder of the places so hidden from our daily lives that we forget the catastrophic future that is looming beyond the melting polar regions. Livingston Island is besieged by the fallout from Deception Island's volcanic activity, which smears the turquoise surface of centuries of glacial accumulation with constant reminders that not only the violence, but the fragility of nature. Australia urgently needs to plan to cut our domestic greenhouse gas emissions to net zero and phase out fossil fuel exports, because we are one of the world's largest polluters. We are the 14th largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally and emit more per person than any other developed country. We are also the 3rd largest exporter of fossil fuels. Clearly, what Australia does matters. And the longer we delay, the harder the problem will be to solve. We cannot call on other countries to take action if we fail to do so. Through my artistic investigations, I work to bring awareness to the public to create an understanding of the issues surrounding human impact on the environment and its long-term effects. Distorted Truths is an artwork that engages this issue of the melting polar regions in a more visceral manner. It is a work part ephemeral and part permanent that creates an intersection between our contemporary lives and the natural environment. Through this work, we witness contamination of the so-called pristine world by our modern consumerist culture. Central to this work is a melting block of ice that has been embedded with the debris that I collected from Telephone Bay, Deception Island, Antarctica. This work is distorted by new truths or fake news of our planet's condition. Over the edifice, as a reflection of the colonialist pillar, a looping video of a real melting glacier from Deception Island is projected. As the ice melts over several days, it manifests the unseen glacial melt that is occurring at our poles. This debris is just a small part of what will eventually wash up on the shores of our most remote places, and in this case, Antarctica. It is not just our impact from a distance that is examined in Distorted Truths, but our presence in the ecosystem, exploring the role of contemporary society in our warming world and how remote places such as Deception Island, Antarctica, is being affected. Brian Wallace and Jeffrey Kastner comment, among the many relationships that define the human condition, the individual's connection to the environment is primary, the elemental background of which all activity is played out. Nature is the biggest of the big picture. We worship and loathe it, sanctify and destroy it. Civilizations are remembered or uncovered, discovered by the bones, writings and art that's left behind. Perhaps a future life form will look back into our past as we do with the Neanderthal and see us and our society as primitive. We seem to be suffering from a collective blindness, not recognising that everything really is connected. The loss of forest canopy affects rainfall along with the increase of CO2, and both drive up temperatures. Transmutation 3. Part of my analogy for evolution using the cell from a tree dandelion, Sonchus carniolensis. Our world Our blue-green planet is reflected in the guise of a dandelion cell and covered with human DNA. Vital to this understanding is that we and all in nature are in flux. This is life in its primary raw state. The building blocks are mutating, infused with our material world of plastics. While we continue to see the Anthropocene as fixable catastrophe and not the reality of humanity on the brink of extinction, we will fail to save ourselves and other species from the impacts of humanity's short-sightedness. Humanity may not survive, but the Earth will in some guise. It will continue to change and evolve. Carl Safina says, humans inhabit only one island, a blue and white marble in a fragile bubble, adrift in the great dark sea of the universe. I work to create a dialogue, a voice for that which has no voice, through greater awareness of how our presence impacts on our biosphere. We sit on a precipice of time, a point at which will never come again, where we can all make a difference. I offer few solutions, but hope, by the way of visual interrogation, to raise the viewer's consciousness. Thank you. This presentation has been written and narrated by the artist Lea Kannar-Lichtenberger. All artworks presented and photographs of said works are by Lea Kannar-Lichtenberger. Any other photographs are reproduced with permission. Any quotes and data presented have been footnoted and cited. This is a 2020 Science Week presentation done in conjunction with Culture at Work and the JLL Bell Bear Foundation.